The Three Diamonds by Matthew Keller. Chapter 1. Upside Down. The trip over the Rocky Mountains had been rough. Heavy turbulence almost caused Michael's flight to be diverted to an alternate, undesired location. With winds violently buffeting the large plane, the flight crew struggled mightily to deliver its cargo of frightened travelers safely onto the mile-high city runway on schedule. Relieved to arrive in Denver unharmed, numerous passengers applauded the landing, despite moments before believing that this was their last day on Earth. As the pilots steered the lumbering aircraft along the many taxiways towards its terminal, the passengers in the cabin gathered their belongings, eager to disembark. "God, I love flying," Michael unintentionally said aloud. He then instantly became fearful of the wrath of other passengers possibly overhearing him. This was due to the nightmare of the previous 2-hour journey from Sin City. As it gradually approached its terminal, the bumps of the pavement and swaying of the aircraft gave the craft the impression of a rickety old ship at sea. Its motion tempting the most likely to become seasick, to do so with each unpleasant undulation. Many passengers stood instantly, retrieving their luggage from overhead compartments once the aircraft taxied off the runway. Michael, however, remained seated. The desire to rush yet go nowhere before the plane halted seemed pointless to him. There was a hectic bustle of people struggling in the single aisle with burdensome luggage, while the aircraft rocked from side to side, making him shake his head in silent protest. "They'll never learn," he thought as the plane braked hard one last time, causing several passengers to lose their balance and others comically and uncomfortable, bumping of their heads. Within seconds of stopping, the flight attendants opened the cabin door, leaped out of the way, and narrowly avoided being trampled by eager passengers desperate to exit, then rushing frantically up the walkway to destinations known only to themselves. As the column of travel-weary passengers moved up the center aisle, the woman who was seated next to Michael politely asked that she and her husband be allowed to exit the row. Her name was Kate, his, Philip. They were a married couple a bit older than Michael. Kate had been seated in between Michael and her husband. Philip had the window seat, and Michael had the aisle. Other than a bit of small talk early in the flight, very little had been discussed due to the breakfast that was served soon after takeoff, and then the turbulence began. Michael was unaware of Philip's reaction regarding the rough flight, but Kate's was crystal clear. She was terrified. Once the bad stuff started, as Kate described it, she held an opened magazine tightly in both hands, seemingly reading it intently. Michael eventually realized that she never turned a page during the entire flight. She didn't close the magazine until all aircraft wheels touched Earth. Impeding their exit, Michael stood up from his seat while frowning slightly. Kate and Philip looked for room to squeeze into the aisle flowing with passengers, each headed towards the aircraft's main doorway.
"That's why I hate flying,"
Kate unexpectedly stated with an upward movement of head and eyes indicating skyward, validating Michael's earlier suspicion. He wondered whether or not she had heard his earlier comment. So he responded with complete honesty. "Really? I love flying. That was the best roller coaster I've ever been on." Michael added, "I'd like to go up again." The stunned woman looked at Michael in complete disbelief. Kate's head then shook slowly from side to side, and with her mouth hung open, she rolled her eyes. She was entirely unable to conjure words of reasoning in response. As she and her silent spouse gathered their property, the end of the line of passengers came into sight, so Michael began to take stock of any property he might have left where he had been seated. Kate and Philip finally found a gap in the crowd and were then steadily drawn away by the flow of other passengers. "Bye," Michael said to the couple. Without making eye contact, Kate nodded with an overanimated motion, looking nowhere in particular while still in stunned silence. Eventually, with fewer people remaining in the aircraft, Michael gathered his overhead belongings, which consisted of a single black gym bag. Michael did enjoy flying but hated dealing with luggage. Traveling lightly was Michael's goal on trips. This flight, however, was an exception. Only a few feet below in the airplane's hold, several pieces of luggage would be extracted by airline ground personnel and transferred to another aircraft. Denver wasn't Michael's final destination. It was a layover for his hometown, St. Louis, Missouri. With all belongings gathered, he finally joined the few stragglers as they trod up the aisle towards the front of the plane. Nearing the cockpit, with its cabin door opened wide, Michael did what he always enjoyed doing when a flight ended. He looked intently into the flight deck with curious unblinking eyes. Despite working in the aerospace industry for years, he was still fascinated by the complex array of aircraft gauges, switches, and dials.
Thanks for flying with us. Have a great day,
a very perky flight attendant stated cheerfully. She had been standing next to the bulkhead. Michael had been entirely unaware that she was there until she spoke. Thanks, Michael replied with a smile and stepped out of the aircraft onto the access ramp. Proceeding up the walkway, Michael considered whether or not most flight attendants enjoyed flying as much as he did. If so, with that flight, it would be understandable why they did it as an adventure. But if not, opted instead for the "enough is enough" career path. Michael then remembered he had promised to call his daughter Sophie once he arrived in Denver. As much as he enjoyed flying, Sophie was a nervous traveler. By car, plane, or bus, anything moving faster than walking speed brought her to a nervous sweat. Sophie and Kate would have been perfect traveling companions. They would have been a combination of holding hands from fright, and fighting over who had possession of the magazine, which was never actually read. Exiting the ramp, Michael entered the terminal, which was filled with a mixture of passengers who, like him, were newly released from his airplane, and those queuing for departing flights in adjacent waiting areas. He suddenly wondered if those waiting for the same aircraft he had just exited would be any more eager to board if they knew what the plane, its crew, and passengers had just endured for the last 2 hours. Looking throughout the terminal, Michael could see an opening ahead into the main airport facility with its shops and restaurants. "God, I'm starving," he stated, acknowledging his now grumbling stomach's needs. Despite the violence of the flight, these sudden pangs were entirely hunger-related, not flight-induced. The trip from Las Vegas began with breakfast in excellent conditions and beautiful clear skies. The meal was fare at best. Juice, coffee, scrambled eggs, sausage links, English muffins, and pear slices on the side. No sooner had the flight attendants retrieved the passenger meal trays and stowed the tray carts than the turbulence began. One unhappy passenger rapidly unbuckled his seatbelt and made a quick dash to the aircraft's restroom, drawing the ire of the lead flight attendant over the intercom. It was unknown how many little bags had been utilized once things became choppy. Passing security checkpoints, with airport staff busily ensuring the safety of passengers and luggage, Michael spotted a cluster of fast food chains packed with already overfed clientele. The lines were long enough to discourage all but the most famished. "Damn," Michael voiced out loud. With another visible frown on his face, he joined the line at the nearest burger and fries restaurant. Starvation is worse than waiting in line, he forced himself to admit. Michael then realized that his cell phone was ringing. It was buried deep inside his gym bag. He repositioned the bag, which was slung over his right shoulder, to retrieve it. Michael without apologies considered himself old school. Cell phones in his opinion were a necessary evil primarily made necessary by profit for others. They were helpful, yet maddening. To him, these status for everyone devices removed the individual from privacy and tethered them to a net like a collar and chain gave a dog freedom. As a young boy, his family's sole rotary phone was mounted on the kitchen wall. It was all they really needed. It was replaced with a new touch-tone device one day while Michael had been in school. Surprised by its presence, and buttons instead of dial, he wondered, how do you make it work? It took less than a second to figure out, requiring no online instructions or electronic tutorials. Michael desperately longed for the simplicity of the past, as well as many other things that were entirely and regrettably unchangeable. His cell phone rang louder since its retrieval from the gym bag. Looking at its display, Michael could see on the caller's ID that it was Sophie. He had yet to place the phone to his ear when he heard her familiar voice.
Hi Daddy, are you there?
Yes, hi Sam, it's me.
Where are you?
Denver, my flight literally just arrived.
How was it?
Michael could sense Sophie's anxiety even through a digital transmission. Well, you know how I love roller coasters.
That bad, huh?
Not for me. But it was a serious upchucker for some, Michael stated, unable to control the slight chuckle it induced. I have a couple of hours till my next flight. Did you have any trouble with my things?
No, you packed everything pretty well.
Michael then noticed that the line ahead of him had moved forward. However, he was holding up the line behind him. The cross looks and shaking heads of several people directed towards him revealed their justified displeasure. Oh, sorry. Go ahead, Michael sheepishly stated while motioning with his free hand for the displeased group to go ahead of him.
What's that?
Sophie asked. Oh, I'm in line getting something to eat and was holding up the line. Guess I'm guilty of one of my pet peeves, people clueless while on their cell phone. I'm such a damned hypocrite. Sophie shared in Michael's realization of his ineptitude and laughed. Hey Soph, since everything is tied down at my place, once you pick me up, I'd like to make a couple stops before we get to the apartment.
Sure, I actually took the day off from work. I figured you'd need to go to a few places, that's fine.
Sophie replied. Great, nothing major.
Right.
Sophie added.
I have all your arrival info, and I'll see you this afternoon.
Michael was about to respond, but Sophie suddenly interrupted him with a sense of urgency.
Oh Dad, I almost forgot, I got a text from Martin Reagan. I assumed it was for me since I was his sister's nurse, but the text specifically asks me to have you contact him.
Any idea what it's about?
No. It may be about your returning to St. Louis and him wanting to meet up with you.
Did you give him my new phone number?
Yes, I assumed he would have called you by now.
A strange feeling of foreboding then crept over Michael. It was like the appearance of a dark cloud interrupting the warmth and light of the sun. Well, if he hasn't reached out to me by now, you're probably right. Okay, I'm starving. I'll see you when I see you, hun.
Okay, bye Dad, love you.
I love you too, sweetheart. Bye. Michael hung up, but the strange feeling remained. He didn't know what it was, but he did know what it wasn't. Hunger. It was an entirely different sensation. All right, Mr. Stomach, let's take care of you, Michael stated, attempting to cast off the sudden unwanted gloom. Re-entering the line, Michael could at long last end his mini-fast with greasy fries and a fattening cheeseburger. He then suddenly recalled something that had occurred earlier on the flight, which he hadn't realized at the time. It also struck his funny bone hard. Without provocation, Michael burst into laughter. His face became flushed as he bent over slightly and placed his right hand on his abdomen, enjoying something hilarious known only to himself. He actually wondered for a moment if he might pass out. Numerous people immediately fixed their attention on him, who, in full view, was having the laugh of a lifetime. "Is he all right?" someone asked with a worried smile. "Must be crazy," another responded. "Should someone call 911?" one person asked sarcastically. The source of the cacophony in the middle of the airport food court was caused by one person. But it was not Michael. Kate was the cause. She was the woman on the plane. She had the magazine turned upside down the entire time.